It started with a road trip I hadn't planned to be part of and ended with a silence I still haven't been able to explain. I wasn't supposed to be there that weekend. The original plan was simple. My best friend, Jake, and his dad, Mark, would drive upstate to help Jake's uncle fix up an old lakeside cabin he'd inherited. Just a weekend of sweat, dust, and heavy lifting. Nothing about it screamed, invite the quiet art student friend who doesn't know how to swing a hammer. But 2 days before the trip, Jake sprained his ankle at football practice. His dad didn't want to cancel. The cabin needed winterizing. Jake suggested I go instead. Dad likes you, he said. Besides, you could use a break from sketchbooks. And overthink. I hoped that he wasn't wrong. I've always been more of an observer than a participant. I sketch strangers on subways. I collect moments like pressed leaves in a notebook, half-drawn faces, overheard lines, shadows cast through windows. I see more than I say, and for as long as I've known Mark, Jake's dad, I've seen him like that too. The quiet kind. Stoic but kind. Widowed. Wakes up early. Fixes things without asking for help. Calls me kid, even though I'm 22 now. Handsome in that rugged, unshaven way, like the men you see in whiskey commercials, except real. When he pulled up in his truck that Friday morning, passenger seat open, thermos of coffee between us, I felt a strange twist in my stomach. I told myself it was nerves. I wasn't used to spending time alone with him, but I couldn't deny the tiny flicker of anticipation either. A 5-hour drive, just the two of us. No distractions. No Jake. I had packed light, just a backpack, sketch pad, and a flannel jacket I always wore when I was unsure of myself. Mark gave a quick nod as I tossed my bag in the back. Ready? Ready as I'll ever be. We didn't talk much at first. Country music played low on the radio. The fall trees blurred past the windows like slow flames, orange and amber bleeding into one another. I caught myself glancing sideways at him when he wasn't looking, watching how his fingers curled around the steering wheel, how his brow furrowed at every turn in the road, how he kept sipping from his thermos like it was a ritual. There was something grounding about him, like even silence felt less lonely when he was in the room. I remembered once, years ago, when I stayed over at Jake's place during a thunderstorm. I couldn't sleep, and I'd walked into the kitchen to get water. Mark had been there too, reading by a dim lamp, a blanket over his shoulders. He hadn't said much, but he poured me a glass and sat with me until the power flickered back on. That memory came back to me now, uninvited, and stayed like the echo of a song I hadn't listened to in years. Still drawn all the time? He asked suddenly, eyes still on the road. Yeah, I said. It's kind of how I make sense of things. He nodded, like that made perfect sense. You always had a quiet way of seeing people. The way he said it made me look down. Thanks, he glanced over. It's not a bad thing. Most folks don't really see each other. Not really. I didn't know what to say to that, so I smiled a little and went back to watching the trees. We arrived at the cabin just after 3. It was older than I expected, peeling red paint, one of the shutters dangling by a hinge, the porch half sunken on one side, but it had charm. You could tell someone once loved it. Mark unlocked the front door and led the way inside. Dust curled. In the light, the air smelled like old wood and pine needles. He handed me a toolbox and nodded toward the back deck, and just like that, we settled into something quiet but constant. We worked, we moved in parallel, we didn't talk much, but I started noticing things. How he'd glance over to check if I was doing okay, how he offered me water before pouring his own, how, every once in a while, his hand would brush mine when passing tools. And every time, something flickered deep in my chest. Not quite panic, not quite hope. Something in between. I told myself I was imagining things, but I wasn't sure I believed it. By the second day at the cabin, I'd stopped pretending I didn't enjoy the quiet rhythm of working beside him. We didn't speak much, but when we did, it was effortless, comfortable. I'd make a dry remark about the stubborn old deck, and he'd counter with a low chuckle, shaking his head like I was more amusing than I deserved to be. You ever used a crowbar before? He asked, watching me struggle to pry up a warped plank. Do chopsticks count? That earned a full laugh, the kind that echoed off the trees behind us. He leaned down beside me, his arm brushing mine as he took the crowbar gently from my hand. Here like this, he said, and I froze as he guided my grip, his hand resting over mine just a moment. Too long. He didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he did, and didn't say anything. We had lunch on the porch. Peanut butter sandwiches and coffee he drank as black. Of course, I added too much sugar and made a face. He raised a brow, still sweetening everything like it's a milkshake. Huh, I blinked. You remember that? He gave a lazy shrug. You and Jake used to come over after school. You'd always sneak sugar packets from the diner down the street? I smiled, surprised. I didn't think you were paying attention. He looked out at the lake, his tone quieter now. I always noticed you, kid. That word again, but this time it landed differently. Not dismissive, not paternal, just soft. The rest of the afternoon passed in a rhythm of sawdust and silence. I sketched during breaks, perched on the porch rail while Mark replaced a section of rotting gutter. I didn't mean to draw him, but my pencil had a mind of its own. His profile, the slope of his shoulders, the way the sun hit the silver at his temples. I shut the sketchbook before he could see it. That evening, The complication arrived, not dramatic, but enough to shift something. He'd only packed one sleeping bag. We'd brought 2 cots, but just the one thick, weatherproof began to the temperature. Dropped fast once the sun sank behind the trees. Mark didn't seem concerned. I'll sleep in the bag. You take the extra blankets. I hesitated, looking at the thin stack of folded fabric. You sure real freeze out there? I've slept through worse. I knew he meant it. He was tough and proud of it, but something about the way he rubbed the back of his neck told me he wasn't entirely convinced himself. I didn't argue. But that night, lying awake on a creaky cot with cold air creeping beneath the blanket, I kept glancing over at him. He was a shape in the dark, chest rising slowly beneath the canvas of the sleeping bag. Every now and then, he'd shift, exhale, adjust. The silence between us felt heavier now, thicker, and I couldn't sleep. I turned toward him. Mark. A pause. Yeah, why'd you let me come on this trip? I mean, we barely talk. Another beat of silence. You're not like the other boys, Jake knows. I swallowed. How so? He let out a long breath. You listen, you watch. You don't fake stuff just to impress people. I didn't know what to say. I'd always thought those things made me invisible. You're easy to be around, he added. And I thought, maybe you could use a change of scenery. I laid there quietly, eyes on the cabin's wooden ceiling. Outside, crickets hummed low. Thanks, I said, barely above a whisper. He didn't answer, but I heard the sleeping bag rustle. A moment later, his voice came again, softer now. You warm enough over there? I paused. Not really. More silence. Then, come over here. My heart jumped. What? You're freezing. I can hear your teeth chatter. The bag's big enough. I won't bite. I hesitated long enough for it to feel like a decision. Then I rose slowly, blanket wrapped around my shoulders, and crossed the few feet between our cots. He unzipped the sleeping bag halfway and shifted to make room. I slid in carefully, trying not to touch him, but the space was too tight. Our arms brushed, our knees bumped, and suddenly I was acutely aware of every part of myself. You okay? He asked, voice low, almost amused. Yeah, just new, he chuckled. You think I'm not nervous too? That surprised me. He didn't answer, but his hand, resting between us, shifted slightly. Not quite touching me, just near enough to feel his warmth. We laid in silence for a while. My breathing slowed to match his. I didn't move, neither did he, but every second, every small shift, felt electric. At one point, I glanced over and caught him watching me. His eyes held something unreadable, soft, uncertain, steady. He didn't look away, neither did I. Something unspoken stretched between us, taut and fragile. We didn't break it, not yet. By the next morning, everything felt different only. Nothing had really changed. Mark and I hadn't said a word about sharing the sleeping bag. When I'd woken up, he was already up and outside, chopping wood like nothing had happened. Like my back hadn't been pressed against his chest for half the night. Like I hadn't spent an hour watching the rise and fall of his breath, wondering what the hell I was feeling and why it scared me so much. I kept telling myself it was just comfort, just warmth. But the memory of his hand brushing against my arm as we settled into the bag, or the way his breathing had slowed when I got close, it all replayed in my mind, again and again, like it wanted to mean more. Maybe I wanted it to mean more. After lunch, he suggested we take the boat out onto the lake. Wind's light, he said. Water's calm. Might help clear your head. I wondered if he could tell my head needed clearing. I nodded and grabbed my sketchbook out of habit, tucking it under my jacket as we made our way to the dock. The boat was small, just a weathered old rowboat with chipped blue paint and 2 wooden benches facing each other. It wobbled under our weight as we stepped in, and I sat opposite him, my knees bumping as lightly. Sorry, I mumbled. He smirked. Not much space to go around. We pushed off, oars creaking softly in the quiet. The lake was a mirror, all silver light and shifting shadows. The air was crisp but gentle, the kind that wraps around you without stealing your breath. Halfway out, the boat suddenly jolted. Mark cursed under his breath and looked over the side. Damn thing took in water. What? I leaned over just enough to see a slow trickle seeping up between the old boards. Is that normal? Nope, but it figures, he sighed, setting the oars down. Rotted from the bottom. We're not sinking fast, but we can't row back like this. My stomach tightened. So what do we do? He scratched his jaw, eyeing the distant shoreline. We drift a bit, then swim the last stretch. I blinked. Swim like with clothes on. You can take 'em off, if you'd rather make it interesting, he said deadpan. I laughed, but it came out awkward. His smile was crooked, teasing, but his eyes lingered on mine a moment too long. The air shifted between us again, like gravity pulling sideways. We sat in silence as the boat gently drifted, water rising ever so slightly between our feet. I pulled my knees up to my chest, trying not to think about how close we were. Every time the boat rocked, our legs brushed. Every time I looked at him, I had to look away just as quickly. You all right? He asked after a while. Yeah, just weird day. He tilted his head. Want to talk about it? I hesitated, then shrugged. I don't know how. Try me. His voice was low, careful, not pressing. Just open. The way he looked at me, it wasn't like a father figure or even a friend. It was like someone who actually saw me. I exhaled. Sometimes it feels like I don't fit into anyone's idea of who I should be. Jake's world is all sports and girls and being loud. I'm not like that. I think you know that. Mark nodded slowly. I do. And sometimes I feel like I see things I'm not supposed to see. Feel things I'm not supposed to feel. The words hung there, too heavy, too vulnerable. But he didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, eyes locked on mine. There's nothing wrong with feeling or seeing more than others. I swallowed hard, even if what I'm seeing is confusing. He didn't answer right away, just studied me. Then he said, softer than before, confusion usually means something inside you is trying to speak louder than you've let it. My chest tightened. I looked away, heart thudding. Sometimes I wonder if it's just me. It's not, he said, without hesitation. When I looked back at him, something was different in his face. Not pity, not caution. Something closer, something warmer. The boat rocked again, and this time he reached out without thinking, his hand landing gently on my knee to steady me. It stayed there a moment longer than it needed to. I felt the warmth of his palm through the denim, felt his thumb shift slightly, almost a rub, before he pulled away. My breath caught. Sorry, he muttered. It's okay, I said too quickly. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was charged, dense. His eyes flicked to my lips for half a second before he looked away, jaw tightening like he was reining something in. I didn't know if I should say something. I didn't trust my voice. Eventually we slid over the side of the boat and swam the last 30 feet back to shore. The cold hit me hard, but not enough to shock away the heat still burning inside my chest. By the time we got back to the cabin, the sun had dipped low behind the trees, setting everything in a golden haze. Mark toweled off and changed in the front room while I stood by the window, staring out at the lake like it had answers I didn't know how to ask for. You warm enough now? He asked from behind me. I nodded, not turning around. I will be. He stepped closer, and I felt him pause just a foot behind me. I'm sorry about earlier, he said. If I made things uncomfortable, you didn't, I whispered. You sure? I turned to face him. His shirt clung to his chest from the swim, his hair still damp, his expression torn but soft. I've never been more comfortable with anyone, I said. He looked at me for a long time, and in that moment, I saw the walls between us begin to crack, not in a destructive way, but like something gentle breaking open. He gave a small nod. Good, and then he said nothing else. But he didn't need to. That night, I couldn't sleep. Mark had gone to bed early, but I stayed out on the porch with my sketchbook balanced on my knees. The pages were mostly empty. I wasn't drawing. I was trying not to feel, but everything in me was feeling. Loudly, I kept reliving the moment on the boat, his hand on my leg, the softness in his voice, the way he looked at me like he was seeing through years of quiet pretending, and then the look in his eyes when I told him I was more comfortable around him than anyone else. It wasn't just in my head. I knew it now, but knowing it didn't make it easier, it made it worse. Because if I admitted what I was feeling, I might break something we'd never get back. And still, some part of me wanted to take that risk. It was nearly midnight when I finally went back inside. The cabin was dark except for the faint glow from the dying fireplace. I walked quietly through the main room, trying not to wake him, but he was awake, sitting on the edge of the cot, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor like he was trying to solve a problem with no good answer. I froze. Did I wake you? He shook his head. Didn't sleep much. I hovered by the doorway, unsure of what to say. After a pause, he looked up at me. You all right? I nodded, then shook my head. I don't know. His eyes searched mine. Come here. I stepped closer. He made room on the cot, and I sat down beside him. We didn't touch, but the space between us was too small to ignore. The fire popped behind us. The only other sound was our breathing. I keep thinking about earlier, I said softly. On the lake? His jaw flexed. Me too. I turned to look at him fully. Were you just being kind? He met my eyes. No. The word hit me harder than I expected. Simple, honest, final. I swallowed, my voice tight. Then what were you being? He looked down, hands clasped between his knees. I don't know how to talk about this. Try, I whispered. He exhaled slowly. I've spent a long time keeping things locked up. For Jake, for the world, for myself. And then you show up, and you're quiet, and you see everything, and I can't hide in the same way anymore. I felt tears sting the back of my eyes. You're not the only one who's been hiding. He turned toward me, his face inches from mine. I've been watching you all weekend, and not in some creepy way, just noticing. The way you smile when you think no one's looking, the way you breathe deeper when you're around trees, the way your hands shake when you try not to feel something. My breath hitched. We're never invisible to me, he said. Even back when you and Jake were kids, I'd catch you watching the world like you were trying to understand where you fit into it. I still don't know, I said, voice breaking. His gaze softened. I don't think you're supposed to know. I think you just find someone who makes the world feel less heavy. He reached out then slowly, like I might flinch, and let his hand rest over mine. I didn't pull away. I'm scared, I admitted, because if I say it out loud, if I say what I feel, there's no going back. He gave the faintest nod. Then let me go first. My heart stopped. He shifted on the cot, turning to face me fully. I care about you. Not like a kid. Not like Jake's friend. Like someone who makes me feel again. I stared at him, stunned. You do? He gave a breathless laugh. Yeah, God help me, I do. I blinked, suddenly aware of my tears slipping free. I don't want to be confused anymore, I whispered. He touched my face, then his fingers brushing just below my eye, catching the tear. Neither do I. His hand lingered on my cheek. I leaned into it without thinking, and then we were closer than we'd ever been. Breathing each other in, I felt his forehead touch mine, and we just stayed like that, anchored in the moment. I didn't plan this, he said, voice raw. No, I tried not to feel it. I know, I said again. Me too. There was a pause, long and quiet. Then, can I kiss you? He asked, so softly I almost thought I imagined it. I nodded. Please. His lips met mine like a secret being told for the first time, tentative, gentle, almost afraid of what it meant. I kissed him back, slowly, with everything I'd been holding in 4 years. The world outside the cabin fell away. It was just us two people who had spent their lives pretending not to feel, finally letting go. When we pulled apart, neither of us spoke. We didn't have to. Instead, he leaned back, slightly, thumb still brushing along my jaw. You okay? I nodded, cheeks flushed. I've never been more okay. He smiled, not the guarded kind I'd seen before, but something real. We crawled back into the sleeping bag, fully clothed, fully quiet, and fully changed. He pulled me close, arm draped over my waist, like it belonged there, and as I lay there, my head tucked under his chin, I knew this wasn't just a moment, it was a beginning. The next morning, everything felt lighter, like something had been unlocked inside me. I woke up to the warmth of Mark's arms still around me, his breath steady against the back of my neck. For a moment, I didn't move, I just listened. To the fire crackling faintly in the next room, to the leaves brushing against the windows, to the quiet rhythm of him still being there. He didn't pull away, neither did I. Eventually he stirred. I felt him shift slightly and lift his head. Morning, he murmured, voice rough with sleep. Morning, I whispered back, smiling, even though he couldn't see it. You sleep all right? Best I have in years. He gave a low hum, and gently squeezed my side before rolling onto his back beside me. We laid there for a few minutes, staring up at the old wooden ceiling beams like they might rearrange into answers we didn't have yet. So, I said, after a stretch of silence, that happened. He chuckled softly. Yeah, that definitely happened. I turned on my side to face him. You okay? His eyes met mine. I am now. Something about the way he said it, simple, steady, no hesitation, made my chest ache in the best way. We stayed there for a while, talking softly under the covers, like we didn't want to scare the moment away. The closeness between us was easy now, unguarded. Our knees brushed without apology, our fingers tangled without thinking. He ran his thumb across my knuckles slowly. You still scared? A little, I admitted. Me too, he said. But, not of this, then what? He looked toward the ceiling again, jaw tight for a moment. Of what comes after? Of Jake, of the world not understanding. I swallowed. Do you regret it? His head snapped back, toward me. Not for a second. I felt myself exhale. Me neither. He reached out then, brushing a piece of hair from my forehead. You sure about this? About me? I nodded, heart full. I have been sure since the lake. He grinned, that same lopsided smirk I'd seen 100 times but never quite like this. Guess I should have drowned us sooner. I laughed and shoved him gently. You're ridiculous. You like it, he said, inching closer. Maybe. He leaned in until our foreheads touched. Definitely. Later, over breakfast, we fell into a new kind of rhythm. The kind where the silence between us didn't need filling, because the air was already warm with knowing. He made scrambled eggs and burnt the toast. I teased him about it. He stole a piece of my bacon when I wasn't looking. This is domestic, I said, grinning. Terrifying, isn't it? He replied with a wink. But beneath the lightness, we both knew it couldn't stay like this forever. Reality would catch up. There would be questions and consequences. As we sat on the porch sipping coffee, I looked over at him. So what happens when we go home? He was quiet for a second. Then, I don't know, but I'm not walking away from this. Jake's going to notice. He nodded. He's smart and he cares about you. He might not understand. Mark looked at me, steady and calm. Then we explain it. Gently. Honestly, I'm not going to lie about how I feel. I smiled, heart thudding in my chest. I didn't think you'd be the one asking me to be brave. I've had enough of hiding, he said. And you're worth the risk. I turned toward him, reaching for his hand. So are you. We sat there like that for a while, fingers intertwined, mugs warm in our laps, the wind whispering through the trees like it had been waiting for this moment. He looked over, his thumb tracing circles on my wrist. You ever think you'd fall for an old man with calloused hands and a beat-up truck? Honestly, I grinned. I think I've been falling since the first time you poured me a glass of water during that storm. He shook his head, smiling to himself. You've got a quiet kind of magic, you know that? And you've got a habit of showing up when I least expect it. Let's keep showing up. Then, he said, voice soft but sure. Deal? And in that golden morning light, with the lake behind us and the road ahead still uncertain, we made something that felt a lot like a beginning. We packed up the next morning. The tools were stored, the porch swept, the windows latched shut. The cabin felt cleaner than when we'd arrived, lighter, like it had exhaled something that had been held in for too long. Maybe we had to. Mark folded the sleeping bag carefully while I cleaned out the fireplace. Neither of us said much, but it wasn't the silence of avoidance. It was the kind that comes after something has finally settled. A peace we didn't want to break just yet. "You sure you're ready to head back?" he asked, glancing at me from across the room. I nodded, closing the iron grate with a soft thud. "Yeah? Doesn't mean I want to." He gave me a crooked smile. "Me either." The truck was already loaded when I paused at the porch steps and turned back for one last look. The lake shimmered just beyond the trees, a thin breeze rustling the leaves in that quiet, deliberate way that always made me feel like nature was whispering something too intimate to repeat. Mark came up behind me, slipping something into my hand. I looked down. It was a folded page from my sketchbook. I opened it. It was the drawing I'd done of him, the one I didn't think he'd seen. My cheeks flushed. "You found this?" He rubbed the back of his neck, sheepish. "I didn't mean to, but it felt like a piece of something real, and I wanted you to know I saw it, and I liked what I saw." I folded it carefully and tucked it into my jacket pocket, heart hammering in my chest. "Thanks," I said quietly, "for seeing me." He reached over then, gently tugging the sleeve of my flannel like it was a secret signal only we understood. When I looked up at him, he wasn't smiling. He just looked. "Sure, I want to keep seeing you," he said. My throat tightened. "You mean, like for real? For real?" He nodded. "Not just when it's easy, not just when we're alone." The weight of that made me blink fast. I'd spent so much of my life living between the lines of friendship, of safety, of what people expected from me. This felt like stepping beyond all of that, risky but finally honest. "I want that too," I said. "But it's not going to be easy." "I don't want easy," he said, taking my hand. "I want true." The gesture was simple, his fingers sliding between mine, warm and firm, but it anchored everything. We weren't pretending anymore. We weren't unsure. This was real. We held hands the whole way to the highway. The closer we got to town, the more reality crept back in. The signs, the traffic, the radio humming again in the background. I watched the trees thin into neighborhoods, and my stomach tightened when I thought of Jake's voice, his loyalty, his tendency to see the world in black and white. Mark glanced at me. "You're thinking about him?" "Yeah," he nodded. "We'll talk to him together. When it's time, you think he'll hate me." "I think he'll be confused," Mark said. "But I also think he loves you like a brother. That doesn't just disappear." I stared out the window, watching a dog chase a bike down the sidewalk. "What if we lose him?" Mark didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, "Then we find our way forward anyway, because I don't want to go back to pretending." Neither did I. When we pulled into Jake's driveway, everything felt too normal. The lawn was mowed. The porch light flicked on automatically. I expected the door to open, for things to snap back into the old rhythm, but they didn't. Mark parked and turned off the ignition. He looked over at me, his hand still holding mine. "You ready?" I exhaled, heart thudding. "No, but let's do it anyway." He smiled. Spoken like someone worth walking into the fire for. We sat there for another moment, neither of us moving. And then, without a word, he leaned over and pressed his forehead to mine. No kiss, no rush, just the quiet grounding of two people choosing each other. "Again, I'll be right beside you," he said. "I know." We stepped out of the truck hand in hand, side by side, into the familiar world that suddenly looked just a little different. And as we walked toward the front door, past the same porch we'd shared peanut butter sandwiches on, past the window, where I once caught him reading alone during a storm, I realized something. This wasn't the end. This was where the real story began.